and they were two servants and a soldier of the centurion Cornelius. As they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I've never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times. And immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. While Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. They called out, asking if Simon, who was known as Peter, was staying there. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Simon, 3 men are looking for you, so get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them." Peter went down and said to the men, "I'm the one you're looking for. Why have you come?" The men replied, "We have come from Cornelius the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people. A holy angel told him to ask you to come to his house so that he could hear what you have to say." Then Peter invited the men into the house to be his guests.
Bless you. Shalom, Havarim. Hello, friends. Good to see you this Sunday morning. Of course, we're talking about animals today, and I'm wondering if you all heard the story about the dog who swallowed someone's watch. Yeah, I know, you know, the old style watch too, those pocket watches that classy people used to carry around back in the days. They pull it out, they probably had handlebar mustaches. The dog swallowed a pocket watch like that. I know, he's okay now, but he has tics. All right. Like the alligator in Peter Pan. All right, good connection there. I also heard about a guy who every day, he would invite his stuffed animals to the table. He would always sit his teddy bear at the table with him. And every day he tried to feed his teddy bear 3 meals a day. And the teddy bear obviously didn't eat anything. This went on for days, it went on for weeks, and the guy just kept trying to feed his teddy bear. And finally one day his teddy bear just yelled out, he said, "That's enough, I'm stuffed." See, I tried 2 because I thought one of them would surely fail, and we were 2 for 2 so far. So on that, no, we will end there, stop there with the jokes for today, end while we are ahead. Today we're talking about animals, kind of, but I guess we are talking about animals, aren't we? Because human beings are indeed animals. We're going to be talking about this image, this vision that Peter had today, and how it applies to us as the church in the 21st century. Because I think there's a lot that we can get from this image, this vision that Peter has, where he hears this word from God, not necessarily to kill and eat people, but to understand that nothing is unclean that God has made clean. And that is, I think, how we are to see one another, to approach one another. And again, this doesn't mean that there's no such thing as sin, that there's no such thing as right or wrong. What this means is there is nobody out there that God doesn't love. There's nobody out there that's beyond God's reach. And therefore, we are all called to be open and loving and welcoming to them as well, and allow God to show them the way. So what I want to do today is I'm going to go old school preacher on you. Yeah, we're going to have a 3-part sermon. Oh, you might want to calm yourself down. A 3-part sermon, and we're going to use a little rhetorical device called alliteration. That's right. So we're going to talk about density, we're going to talk about discomfort, and we're going to talk about discernment. old school, not fire and brimstone, but old school in the fact that we're going to go with some alliteration in a 3-part sermon. If you can handle that, we're going to go that route. So I want to start today with the idea of density, and we're going to see how this applies to the church. Now, when I say the word density, you should be thinking of compact things, right? If you think of like different size, same size objects, but some of them are heavier than others, even though they're the same size. Think of like a softball and a shot put. So they are both roughly the same size. Which one of them is heavier? A shot put, because that's just like a ball of metal, like a heavy thing. I don't know if it's lead or just what. And it's all you can do just to throw it, 50 feet in front of you. A softball is much less dense. It's not as compact. So when we think of density, these things that are less dense are more porous. Things can get through them. But things that are very dense, they are not easily penetrated. So I'm probably going to date myself a few times in this sermon today. Back in the 80s, when somebody was kind of slow at picking something up, if you said something to them multiple times, you might call that person dense. All right? You've heard that? I'm not just inventing that. That wasn't just an Ohio thing. Okay. You've never heard that. I've told you that 3 times now, Mike. Teed that one up for me. Thank you. When I think... Focus, Kevin, focus. When I think of Peter, I think that he is rather dense at times. Like, think of all that Peter did. Like, first of all, I love Peter because he's full of energy. He's always quick to help out and jump up and lend a hand. But he just doesn't get it. How many times does he say things just off the cuff that make no sense? At one point, he's up on the top of a mountain with Jesus. He's like, dude, we should build houses here. And Jesus is like, we got work to do down there, but I like your energy. Else times he's like, he's trying to defend Jesus whenever the guards come to take him, and out comes the sword, and he chops off the ear of the guard of the Romans, and Jesus is like, come on, man, now I've got to heal this guy. Puts the guy's ear back on. Peter doesn't seem to get it. Whenever Jesus tries to wash his feet, he says, never, Lord, you shall not wash my feet. Even after Jesus is taken by the guards, there's 3 times that he denies even knowing Jesus. So Jesus, we see in Peter that he's kind of dense. He's slow at getting things. And in John's gospel, there's a story that after Jesus is resurrected, he comes back, and he's there with the disciples. He's on the shore of, I think it's the Sea of Galilee, and he's talking to Peter. And he says to Peter, Peter, do you love me? And Peter's like, yeah, I love you. And Jesus responds, well, then feed my sheep. He gives him a job. This is a metaphor for teaching the teachings of Jesus to other people. Take what I've given to you and feed other sheep with that. But he doesn't seem to get it the first time. So what's Jesus do? He does it again. He repeats this whole scenario. He says, Peter, do you love me? He says, well, yeah, of course I love you. And then Jesus says, well, feed my sheep. And then a 3rd time, Jesus comes to him. He says, Peter, do you love me? And I think Peter's getting a little embarrassed at this point. He's like, you know I love you, right? And he says, well, then feed my sheep. He has to say this how many times? 3 times until Peter seems to make sense of what Jesus is telling him. And that's why I say Peter is kind of dense. Now, the thing is, I'm not sure that Peter is alone here. I find some comfort in hearing all the times that Peter fails, and yet he's still the one that Jesus says, upon this rock I shall build my church. In spite of all the densities, all the slip-ups, all the mistakes that Peter makes, Jesus still selects that guy to be a leader moving forward. And I read an article this week. It was called 3 Rules of 3. It's hard to say. 3 Rules of 3 for Successful Communication. And this was written from a business perspective, written from a secular perspective as well, for business kind of meetings. Whenever a boss goes into a meeting, when they're having conversations with their employees, this article says, in order for the people to get it, for them to understand what you are saying, a boss must tell their employees something 3 times. And they break it down like this. The first time whenever you're in a meeting, you're trying to explain something, the people are just trying to understand the problem at hand. They're just wrapping their mind around the issue that you're trying to present to them. You present it a second time, and they're trying to understand your solution. You're bringing something new to them, and they're saying, okay, well, let me understand a little bit better what you're saying. And then after the first two, when you bring it to them a third time, they will ask important questions, critical questions, in engaging your idea. They're starting to interact with what you're saying, and only then do they truly understand it. So when I talk about Peter being dense, I might not be all that graceful toward him. I think maybe we should just say Peter is normal. That's just the way the human mind works. 3 times Jesus said, "Do you love me? Feed my sheep." It took the third time till Peter finally got it. So we have today's text from the book of Acts. And this is after Jesus has gone, he's returned to heaven. The disciples are here on earth. They're starting this church, they're starting this movement, and it's expanding. It's going beyond just the traditional Jewish world. And Peter is staying in the house of a man named Simon the Tanner. Remember that, okay? Can you remember that? Where's he staying? Is at Simon the Tanner's house. So he's at the Tanner's house. So he's lying there as he's kind of preparing. He's waiting for someone's going to make him a meal. They're going to bring him food. And at that time, as he is lying there, he has this vision. And I like this picture here. It's kind of blurry, but yet you see, Peter's lying there. He's got this vision, and he sees this image of the sheet being let down from the heavens. And this one has different animals than the last one. The kids were having fun trying to find the different animals. Hey, there's a giraffe, there's a hippopotamus, and a elephant. He has this image, this vision, and he hears this voice. It says, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." And what does Peter say? He says, "Surely not, Lord." He's usually Elizabethan in my head. "Surely not, Lord. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." I know, Shakespeare Center's calling me up right now. And this is repeated. It happens again. He sees this coming down from the sky. And the voice calls out again, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." And he repeats the same response. He says, "Surely not, Lord. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." And guess what? It happens a third time. This comes down from the sky. He hears that voice, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." He says, "Surely not, Lord. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." Because again, it takes how many times until things actually sink in? It takes 3 times. I've told you that 3 times now. You've got it, right? What's Peter's deal here? Why is he so afraid of these animals? Maybe, let's be honest, I wouldn't probably want to eat snake or giraffe myself. But what's the deal here is he is trying to eat kosher. This was very important. This was the Levitical laws taught you what was clean and unclean, what was ceremonially okay to eat, and if you ate the other things, you would become ceremonially unclean. You could not worship in the temple. And you see this even in modern Jewish communities. You'll see food that's labeled as kosher. If you ever see those funny little squiggly marks on your food, that is food that has been labeled as kosher. Or we often miss it. How about those little U's that are circled on your food? Have you seen those before? Now you're hungry. That says that this has been certified kosher by the Orthodox Union. It's an O with a U inside of it. So even to this day, this still really matters to the Jewish community. It has to be handled in a certain way. It can't have cross-contamination from certain animal kind of byproducts. You are not going to have kosher chips fried in lard. So this has been certified kosher. This was very important to Peter. He was simply following the law that was given to him. And he hears this voice over and over, "Peter, get up, kill, and eat." And it's not until the third time that this happens that he realizes that this is about more than just food. Because before Peter received this image, before he got this message from God, this guy named Cornelius had also received a message that they are to go and find Peter. And Peter is going to bring this guy Cornelius, this Gentile, this outsider, into the fold. But it took a few times because Peter is not dense, but Peter is human. All right, the first D is density. The next one is discomfort. I like comfort. Am I alone there? I like to be comfortable. Let's be honest. As soon as church is over, I'm going to change my clothes. I'm going to wear shorts and a t-shirt the rest of the day. If you catch me most any other times, I am not wearing a button-down shirt with a collar. I love I love polo shirts because they're t-shirts with a collar, and I can get away with that. Can I get an amen from the men in the congregation? Come on now. I'm also convinced that comfort can be the enemy of what God is calling us to. Like, comfort can keep us from doing the things that God wants us to do, because at times we're called to be uncomfortable. That God is calling us into doing things that are uncomfortable. God calls us to be uncomfortable. And often that means interacting with people we normally wouldn't interact with, talking to people that are different than we are, having conversations, having relationships with people that we might not ordinarily even like. So let's go back to what I asked you to remember earlier. In this story, we find Peter, and Peter is doing something that is actually leading to his discomfort. I assume it's causing him to be uncomfortable, because do you remember where Peter is staying? He is staying in the tanner's house. You did it so well, too. You didn't say Simon the Tanner. You said the tanner's house. It was perfect. If you didn't grow up in the 80s, that is the family from Full House. Their last name was the Tanners. All right. I should quit now and just call it a day. Simon the Tanner. He was not called the Tanner because he was a part of Danny Tanner's family. He was called a Tanner because he worked with dead animals. He worked with carcasses. And here's the thing about working with carcasses. For many of us, that sounds like gross work. What he did was he would take animals, usually after the meat products were removed, and he would tan the hides to make them into leather, usable leather. And it's gross to us, but it's even more than that for a observant Jew. And I'm sure you all remember again Leviticus chapter 11, which says in verse 39, if an animal that you are allowed to eat, so even if it's a clean animal, if it dies, anyone who touches its carcass will be unclean till evening. So you touch an unclean animal, you touch a pig, for instance, as a Jewish person, no matter if that's still alive or if it's dead, if you touch that thing, you become unclean. But even if there's a clean animal, after its carcass has been cleaned, if you touch that carcass, you become unclean for the rest of the day. So for Simon, this was actually his job, was to handle dead animals. That meant that he was in a state of perpetual uncleanliness. And anybody that entered into his house was therefore considered unclean. So here's Simon. He voluntarily went into the house of Simon the Tanner. And I should also say, nobody chooses to be a tanner. Like, they do that because there's no other options. This is like extremely low on the social totem pole. I don't even want to start naming positions or jobs like to compare that to today. It's like being a pastor today. No. Like, it's way down on the social totem pole. And he went to stay with that guy. And it sounds like Jesus is rubbing off on Peter a little bit here. He's finally picking up on this. So he stays with Simon the Tanner when he has this image, this vision that says to kill and eat. And he realizes it's about more than just animals. It's about saying that people aren't unclean. And Cornelius sends his men to get Peter. And Peter goes to meet Cornelius. And he arrives at Cornelius' house. And he says, at this point, Peter says to them, you are well aware that it's against our law for a Jew to associate or visit a Gentile. Just by being in the presence of this Gentile, Peter was breaking the law. But yet here he was, doing this because he felt God was calling him to do this. Now, to be clear, there's nowhere in the Old Testament, in the Torah, that says that it was against the law to go and spend time with a Gentile. But there must have been something within their social construct, something within society that said this was more than just a taboo. This was breaking a law. Peter understood it as a law. And yet he has this, I'll finish this verse for you. Peter said to them, "You are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate or visit a Gentile, but God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean." Now, in our society today, I think we tend to divide along a number of lines. It hasn't changed in my 44 years of life here on this earth. I think it's went a little before my time as well, and probably will go on a bit as well afterward. We divide by things like race, ethnicity, level of income, just things like that. We divide over these various things. And it's not hard to see in different communities, like this might be the Jewish part of town, or this might be the Italian part of town, this is the black part of town, or this is the Latino part of town. But I was recently encouraged a little bit. On Thursday, we sat down at a meeting. On Glenn's 80th birthday, I made him go with me to a meeting. If you missed it, Glenn turned 80 on Thursday, and I'm just going to say that now for everybody to hear. On Glenn's birthday, we went to a district council meeting, and at that council meeting, we welcomed Iglesia Shalom, the church plant in our community, as a congregation in formation in our district. So they have been in existence as a church plant for 5 years. They're taking the steps towards becoming a full independent congregation. And at that meeting, somebody that I respect shared a story, and he wasn't able to cite sources, which made me a little uncomfortable, but yeah, I'm going to share it with you anyway. He told this story about how many people have come to the Shenandoah Valley in the last decade or two. People from different ethnic backgrounds, people coming as refugees, or people just coming to resettle, people from Africa, people from Latino kind of backgrounds, people from Middle Eastern countries have come to the Shenandoah Valley. And he said somebody told him that they did research and found out one of the reasons they found the Shenandoah Valley to be so hospitable was because the churches in the area had shown hospitality to these people. And I'm like, holy cow. Like, that shouldn't be so surprising to me, but like, I don't often hear the good side of the church like that from the broader community. And I love that people that are coming to this community are saying the church is welcoming us in. And I love this because, we're in this community. I live a block and a half from Gypsy Hill Park. And there's people sitting in this congregation right now that were alive when that was the white park. Remember, Gypsy Hill Park was the white park, and Montgomery Hall Park was the African American park. It wasn't until the 1960s that these parks were desegregated. And I'm like, I hear about that in books and history books in my lessons growing up, but like that's right there beside me in my community. But yet there's something beautiful going on that makes us maybe a little uncomfortable because there's people that speak different languages, people that look a little bit different than us, people that are moving in all around us. There's a Middle Eastern family over here, there's a Latino family over here, and there's people all around us. And guess what? I think it makes me uncomfortable at times, but I think it's beautiful as well. Because yeah, there's language issues, there's cultural challenges that make me feel a little, well, what am I supposed to do or what am I supposed to say? But I think that this is where God is moving. God is calling us into this discomfort. And somebody here sent me an article this morning. I wish I would have read that before the start of church this morning. Probably would have fit really well. Story about the Pope welcoming a sex worker into the church. These things make us feel uncomfortable. Sometimes these people that just aren't exactly like us. But I believe that's what God is calling us to do. Just like he called Peter to welcome in Cornelius and his family. Let's keep going. We've got one more. Oh, and in spite of all this, remember, but God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. The final word that I want to break down today is the word discernment. And this is a fun word to think about because I think that too often we don't think. We're pretty quick to act without thinking things through. And again, Peter was really good at this. He didn't always think things through. He just jumped up and did things. But I do believe that God is calling us to be a discerning body, especially moving forward in the 21st century. So think about that story again, the whole scenario about Peter and Cornelius and the call to kind of come together to have this powwow, this collaboration between these different groups. Who started that whole movement? Was that Peter's idea? No, it wasn't. Actually, if you look at the first 8 verses, I didn't have Marlene read those, but the first 8 verses talk about how God first spoke to Cornelius. So this was a movement that started within the Gentile group. And later on, Peter is called as well. And God essentially invites Peter to join in what is already taking place. This was not Peter's idea. This was God working through the Gentiles and inviting Peter, hey, would you join in and do this as well? So again, I asked the question, who first receives this message from God? It's not the man of God, Peter. It's not the guy upon whom the church was formed, Peter. No, it was a Gentile. So I believe that in the 21st century church, when we see churches declining in size and perhaps in power, we need to do more discernment to know where God is moving among us and joining in with that movement. Because too often we just say, we're going to do this or we're going to do that. Every church wants to have a wonderful children's program. Every church wants to have this homeless ministry. Every church wants to have all sorts of different programming. But honestly, every church can't afford to do that. Every church can't staff those sorts of ministries. Think about it like this. What do you think the average church size in America is today? Throw out a number. 192. I asked her to throw out a number, and she did. Did you read my notes earlier? No. 60 is the exact number. Average church size in America is 60. We always hear about the mega churches, right? How many mega churches do you think are there in America, like percentage-wise? What percentage of churches are mega churches? Less than 1% of churches are mega churches. And mega churches defined by 5,000 people or more. It makes 10% or less than 10% of active Christians today. So if you look at these numbers, like most churches can't do everything that they want to do unless we work together. When we start working together, you can see things happening. If you start discerning, like, where is God already at work, like Peter had to do, then you can join in that, and we can get things done for the kingdom. For instance, I think Vacation Bible School is a wonderful ministry. For those of you that have kids, there's a chance to send your kid away for a couple hours every day in the summer. They can meet new friends and learn new things. It's a great thing. But most churches, 60 people or less, they can't put on a Vacation Bible School by themselves. And I'm glad to say that in our district, again this year, we have 3 churches that are collaborating, working together to have a Bible school. Let me know if you want to send your kids to Bible school again this year. Homeless ministry. Can we have a homeless shelter? Do you think we could do that on our own as a church? No, but we've been raising money for the Valley Mission. And there's really good things happening down there. And I think we're going to send about $3,000 to them here in the coming days. And like children's ministries, there's a lot of churches that would love to have vibrant, budding children's ministries. And not everybody can afford that. Like most churches can't afford a full-time pastor, let alone having an additional youth pastor on staff. So what can we do? We can work together. And one thing that we've done well in this church is we've had this Bible quizzing going on. And with Bible quizzing, if you look at that group, there's some kids that have been on our Bible quiz team that have never set foot in this church on a Sunday morning. We have people that have been a part of the Catholic Church or a part of Nazarene churches that have never been here on Sunday morning. And you want to know what? That's awesome. Like, we're not in competition with these churches. We are collaborating with them. And can you help me out? How many people here know the name of our Bible quiz team? Yell it out. Somebody yell it out.
Queen City United.
The Queen City United. QCU, yeah. The QCU, well, a lot of professional soccer or football, if you're from Europe, a lot of professional football teams are called the United. Have you ever noticed that? And the reason for that is there were like these other football teams. I call it football because that's what they do. These football teams, they were getting small, they were understaffed, and they come together and they say, hey, you have a really good coach, we have a really good goalie, let's work together and we'll be one team. They became like Manchester United. I don't know if this was the intention of our Bible quiz team, but I'm going to give our coach the benefit of the doubt here. Our Bible quiz team is made up of people from various churches, various parts of the world or the city that come together and do what? Work as one. Queen City United is an example of looking ahead and seeing where God is active and joining in that work. So in conclusion, let's put it all together. Peter was dense, but so, let's be honest, so am I. There's a chance that you might be a little bit dense at times as well. Sometimes it takes 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 times until things get through. Don't beat yourself up over that. Know that you are in good company. Peter was dense, so am I. But I believe that God is calling us to be uncomfortable, calling us into discomfort. That means at times we're going to have to interact with people who don't look like us, that don't talk like us, that don't do things just like us. That's okay. God called Peter into that relationship. I think God is calling us into that as well. And what we must do is we are not called to simply plow our own path or do our own thing. We're called to look and see where God is already active in the world and join in where God is doing things and making things happen. I believe this is the future that God is calling us all to as churches around the world. To understand our own density doesn't mean that we are just simply missing it, but to keep trying, to keep listening, to be called into discomfort, and to work together for the greater good. Join me in prayer. God, today we thank you for all that you're doing in and among this community, and thank you for the ways that you have called us to participate in that. And we realize that at times that may cause us to have to get to work with people who are different than us, who think differently than us, who just do life differently than us. Help us, Lord, to overcome our own prejudices. Help us to be there with one another, collaborating for your kingdom here on earth. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Well, this brings us to the time